The sun shone with what could only be described as malicious cheerfulness over the village of Fenchurch Little, where the populace was, by ancient compact, permitted to mourn without interference from the barometer. Yet on this particular May morning, as black crape fluttered with infuriating lightness about the door of St. Ethelreda's, and the bell tolled with unconvincing solemnity, being half-cracked since Easter and inclined to hiccup, the village made a valiant effort to look as though death was still a sombre affair. The subject of this unseasonable farewell was the late Colonel Ambrose de Vries, retired from the Raj, possessed of a liver the size of a prize marrow and a voice like a cavalry trumpet, and now, at 73, finally subdued by a minor domestic misstep and a polished oak staircase. He had died, it was said, in the act of descending with a brisk step and a touch of Madeira still in him. The footman, who had very nearly been sacked on the spot for admitting the latter detail, had discovered the colonel at the foot of the stairs, neck crooked at an unkind angle, and the Morning Post scattered around him like confetti at a bureaucrat's wedding. Cardiac arrest, the doctor said. Stupidity, said the housekeeper who had warned him about socks on stairs since 1932. Unfortunate, said the vicar whose funeral fees were overdue. But it was Lady de Vries, née Ursula Marpleton of the Cornwall Marpletons, and recently afflicted with a kind of widowhood that rendered her almost statuesque in her stillness, who said nothing at all. She stood throughout the service with an expression carved from alabaster and a veil that might have once graced a Gothic effigy, exuding an icy dignity that made the altar lilies seem presumptuous, which brings us to the matter of the lilies. They were not ordered, said Mrs. Blythe, the florist, with absolute finality. She asked for white chrysanthemums, very particular. Nothing fragrant, she said. Yet the church, overzealous, doubtless, or else supplied by a hitherto unknown admirer, had been choked with the heavy scent of Madonna lilies, cloying and sweet as over ripe pears. Lady de Vries had shown no outward sign of annoyance, but Mrs. Blythe insisted she turned just a fraction. In Fenchurch Little, that was practically a tantrum. Enter, as if on cue and considerably earlier than scheduled, Lord Peter Death-Bredon Wimsey. He had arrived uninvited, unheralded, and quite possibly unmissed, if one asked the colonel's relatives, a tetchy assortment of distant cousins, and one brooding godson who kept dabbing his eyes with suspicious frequency. Wimsey claimed to be passing through on his way to inspect some unpromising manuscripts of the Gawain cycle in a local attic. In truth, it was the lilies that piqued his interest, or rather, the widow's expression when she saw them. "I say," he murmured to the vicar after the interment, "do you happen to know if lilies are a customary floral choice for cardiac arrests?" The Reverend Pottle blinked at him. "Lilies are traditional," he offered cautiously. "Indeed, and yet our dear widow made a point of eschewing them. Curious, a woman of such precise sensibilities. It's rather like ordering tea and being served absinthe. You're not suggesting—" "My dear Reverend, I suggest nothing. I merely observe, and observation, like indigestion, often signals deeper disturbances." The vicar muttered something about propriety and made a hasty retreat toward the vestry. Wimsey remained behind, hands clasped behind his back, contemplating the tombstones freshly turned at earth. He hummed a few notes from the Mikado, then turned abruptly to the footman, who stood awkwardly at the lich gate. "Tell me, Bowers, if that's your name, what sort of socks did the colonel prefer on Tuesdays?" The footman blinked. "Sir, don't worry. It's all frightfully important in its own insignificant way." With that, Lord Peter Wimsey strolled off down the church path, his cane tapping rhythmically against the flagstones, the scent of lilies still heavy in the air. And somewhere behind the veil of mourning, a pattern, thin as spider silk and twice as sticky, had begun to form. Lady de Vries's drawing-room was as impeccable as her mourning veil. Pale walls, anemic with restraint, and rugs so precisely aligned one might suspect they were ruled into place with a draftsman's square. Lord Peter took the proffered seat, a spindly Queen Anne affair with upholstery that suggested distant whispers of roses, and folded his hands upon his knees with the reverence of a man awaiting a concert overture. "I must apologize, Lady de Vries," he began, with the faintest twinkle at the edge of his eye, "for imposing upon you at such a time. Death is a bore, even when punctual, and yours, if I may say so, has arrived inconveniently." Lady de Vries's expression did not shift. "My husband's death was sudden," she said evenly, "but not, I think, unwelcome. He had begun to forget things, small things mostly, but it was growing." Wimsey tilted his head. The forgetfulness of a man or of the world around him? A bit of both. He would misplace his reading spectacles and then accuse the parlour-maid of sedition. He'd open a letter twice, or insist it had not arrived at all. He once accused the under-gardener of poisoning the dog. The dog had simply taken to sleeping in the sun. "Delightful," murmured Wimsey, "though I imagine less so in practice. May I be impertinent, Lady de Vries? You have been nothing else. I adore you for that. Now tell me, why chrysanthemums?" That, at last, produced the faintest flicker, perhaps of amusement, perhaps disdain. "Lilies," she said crisply, "are morbid. I've always detested their scent. My husband, you see, adored them." "Ah," said Wimsey. "Then we must assume someone else adored your husband very much, or intended to seem as if they did." She rose with the grace of a figure once painted for a pre-Raphaelite window and moved to the mantel. "Mr. Wimsey, do you believe my husband was murdered?" He considered her words like a man swirling the last sip of brandy. "I believe," he said at last, "that death, like theatre, is rarely accidental in country houses, and when it tumbles down a staircase, there's usually a cue." Her fingers brushed an alabaster urn on the mantelpiece, a meaningless gesture, yet not quite meaningless. "You should speak to Mrs. Rivington. She was here that morning. One of my bridge ladies. She stayed too late, as usual." "Indeed? And how late is too late in a house run on the rails of mourning etiquette?" "She left at 11:30. Ambrose went up shortly after. I was in the morning room, writing notes of condolence to people I do not like." Wimsey stood. "A noble endeavour. May I also trouble your housekeeper? I find servants' testimonies to be woven of excellent fabric, especially when patched with resentment. She is in the still room. Her name is Miss Lamb." "Excellent. I do adore a biblical surname in domestic service. It lends them the air of oracles." He found Miss Lamb arranging glass jars with an expression usually reserved for diagnosing mildew. She had the compressed lips of a woman who took death seriously only in its power to disrupt luncheon. "Miss Lamb," Wimsey said gently, "forgive the intrusion, but I wonder if I might ask a few trifles, beginning with the socks." She blinked. "Socks, my lord?" "Yes, of the late colonel. I'm told he fell. Slipped, presumably. Socks are often complicit in such betrayals." "I wouldn't know what socks he wore," she said, and then after a pause that hinted at a deviation from truth, "though they were black silk. He'd had them 2 Christmases ago from Lady de Vries. Never wore them much. Complained they clung." "Indeed. And yet he wore them that morning." I believe so." "Tell me, Miss Lamb, did he descend the stairs swiftly or reluctantly?" She frowned. "How would I know that?" "You strike me as the sort who hears things. Steps on stairs, crumpling newspapers, raised voices." She sniffed. "He never descended slowly, always like a storm." "Then it is odd," murmured Wimsey, "that the post should have been scattered, unless he tripped over it, which is undignified for both parties." She gave a tight nod. "The maid brings it in at 11:15. And the colonel would have come down just after, 5 minutes or so, but I heard nothing unusual, not till Bowers cried out." "Excellent." He gave a little bow. You've been tremendously helpful. Do tell me, who handles the flowers? Flowers, my lord? Yes, delivered for the funeral. From whom did they come? Miss Lamb's lips thinned further. They arrived anonymously. How charmingly literary, but I imagine someone signed the delivery slip? There wasn't one. A box of lilies from the London Flower Exchange, just left at the door. And no card? None. I say, he mused aloud. It's awfully forward of death to send a calling card without a name. He stepped out into the hallway and nearly collided with the footman, Bowers, bearing a tray of crystal glasses with such exaggerated caution that Whimsy suspected either nerves or recent demotion. Ah, Bowers. Just the man. A quick question. Was the Colonel in the habit of reading his correspondence on the stairs? No, my lord, said Bowers after a pause. He always read it in the blue chair in the study, next to the decanter. And yet the letters were found on the stairs. Yes, my lord, scattered. Like they'd fallen with him. Curious. One wonders, did he open them at all? I believe so. Did he ever receive anonymous letters? A flicker passed over the young man's face. Once or twice, sir. When he had that quarrel with Major Brent, about the pheasants. The Colonel said men who can't aim shouldn't shoot. Major Brent didn't take kindly. Few bad shots do, and were there letters recently? Not that I saw. Quite. He turned toward the front hall where sunlight glinted off the polished brass umbrella stand and a faint trace of lilies still hung like an insult. He examined the staircase anew. Its angle, the distance from the post pile to the first baluster, the discreet curve at the fifth step that narrowed the tread subtly. Whimsy crouched and examined the rug. There, invisible to most, was a tiny crescent tear. He rose. Back in the drawing-room, Lady de Vries accepted his return with the resigned air of someone enduring a particularly affected chamber quartet. "My lady," he said softly, "your husband's death, I fear, is beginning to look like rather more than overindulgence and bad socks." She looked up. "Do you know anyone," he continued, "who would send lilies not out of affection, but out of contempt?" For the first time she flinched. "Perhaps," she said after a silence too poised to be anything but deliberate, "you should ask my stepson." Lord Peter Wimsey found himself standing once again in the dimly lit study of the late Colonel de Vries, the air thick with the scent of aged leather, tobacco ash, and that lingering trace of lilies, an incongruous note in such a room of masculine habit. The walls were lined with books, most dog-eared and well-thumbed. Yet the Colonel's manner of life, as the servants insisted, was orderly to the point of ritual. Everything had its place, even if death had chosen to scatter the post across the staircase. Whimsy's fingers traced the bindings absent-mindedly before settling on a neat pile of correspondence on the desk. Some letters were unopened, their edges still crisply folded. Others lay askew, hastily read, or perhaps left deliberately incomplete. The late afternoon sun slanted through the mullioned window, casting long shadows that draped over the pages like spectral fingers. Whimsy's eyes narrowed as he considered the spatial arrangement. The study door slightly ajar, the blue chair where the Colonel supposedly read his mail, and the staircase visible through the open doorway, curving with an almost serpentine grace. The chronology thus far was straightforward. Lady de Vries received no lilies but chrysanthemums. The flowers arrived anonymously. The Colonel was found dead on the staircase with letters strewn about, and there was a recent history of tension with a certain Major Brent. Yet beneath the surface, the precise sequence remained elusive. A soft footfall interrupted his concentration. He turned to find the vicar, Reverend Pottle, entering hesitantly, his face flushed from the warm spring air. "Lord Peter," he said, "there is talk among the parishioners, unfortunate talk, regarding the late Colonel's state of mind in his final days." "Indeed," Whimsy responded, arching a brow. Reverend Pottle shifted uneasily. Whispers of irritability, perhaps some paranoia, that he feared someone, though who, none can say. A common complaint among those nearing their earthly curtain call, I dare say, Whimsy replied dryly. Do these whispers suggest any particular enemy? Not directly, but I was advised to mention your stepson, Mr. Philip de Vries. He has been rather withdrawn, and there is a tension between him and his stepfather that is palpable. Ah, the stepson, Whimsy mused, the inevitable figure in any country house drama, yet often misunderstood. Would you care to meet him? Asked the vicar. He's at the rectory, attending to some unsettled matters. Whimsy smiled faintly. Lead the way, Reverend. The stepson often holds the missing piece of the puzzle. The rectory was a modest structure nestled among lilac bushes, with a tidy garden and a front door freshly painted in a hopeful shade of cream. Philip de Vries awaited in the drawing-room, a tall, slender man with eyes too sharp for comfort and a countenance marked by the impatience of youth and the weight of familial expectation. He rose as they entered, inclining his head with the briefest hint of civility. Lord Peter Whimsy, I've heard of you, and your reputation for stirring quiet waters. Whimsy inclined his hat slightly. I do enjoy a good ripple, Mr. de Vries. It keeps one alert. Philip sank back into the armchair, folding his long fingers over one another. I suppose you wish to discuss my late father. Precisely. There was a moment of silence, filled only by the ticking of a grand clock standing sentinel by the fireplace. Whimsy observed the young man's restless gaze, the subtle twitch of a jaw muscle. Your relationship with your stepfather was strained, Whimsy began. Philip exhaled sharply. Strained is putting it mildly. Ambrose was a difficult man, arrogant, commanding, and fond of reminding me that I was an interloper. His estate, his legacy, his rules. I was tolerated at best. And at worst? At worst, ignored. When he began forgetting things, it became frustrating for all. He blamed me for trivial matters, and I'm afraid I did not respond with much patience. Whimsy nodded thoughtfully. And the morning of his death? Where were you? Out in the village, visiting a client. I had a business engagement at 11, as anyone can verify. Alibi noted, Whimsy said, eyes glittering. May I ask if you were aware of any recent quarrels or threats against your stepfather? Philip's gaze darkened. There was that business dispute with Major Brent over the pheasants. Nothing more. That man is a relic, clinging to outdated grievances. And the flowers at the funeral? The lilies? Philip's lips twitched, a semblance of a sneer. I had no knowledge of those. Lady de Vries never mentioned them to me. I suspect someone wanted to make a statement. A statement of what nature? That my stepfather was a man unloved, or worse, despised. Whimsy's smile was thin and measured. Or perhaps, Mr. de Vries, a message meant for someone else. The stepson's eyes narrowed. You suggest I had enemies? Enemies are rarely so simple. Let us speak of timing. You say you were away at 11. Yes. And your business client? A Mr. Hudson, a solicitor. He can confirm. Very good. I shall pay him a visit. Whimsy turned to the Reverend. May I leave you for a moment? I wish to inspect the village. The vicar inclined his head. Of course. I trust you will find Fenchurch Little charming, despite recent events. Whimsy strode out into the cooling air, the village unfolding before him with its neat cottages, bustling shops, and the unmistakable hum of idle gossip. His first stop was the village post office, a quaint establishment run by Mrs. Toller, a woman with sharp eyes and a tongue that wagged faster than the shop bell. Good afternoon, Mrs. Toller, Whimsy greeted. Might I trouble you for some local knowledge? Not at all, my lord, though I'm afraid knowledge here is often a blend of truth and fancy. Splendid. I'm investigating the late Colonel's correspondence. Were there any unusual letters lately? Threatening, perhaps? Mrs. Toller pursed her lips. There was one, a fortnight ago. Came without a return address, marked simply private. The colonel looked most disturbed when he read it, but he sealed it away quickly. Do you recall who brought it? A young postman named Gilbert. New lad. Quiet, but trustworthy. Whimsy made a note. And the Major Brent dispute? Did you hear much about it? Oh, yes. Everyone in the village knows the two have been at each other's throats for months over the pheasant preserves. The Major's a temperamental sort, always threatening to take matters into his own hands. Thank you, Mrs. Toller. You've been very helpful. From the post office, Whimsy proceeded to the village pub, the Red Lion, where the scent of hops and the low murmur of voices offered a stark contrast to the stifling formality of the De Vries household. At the bar stood Gilbert, the postman, polishing glasses with the deliberate care of a man keen to appear unruffled. Gilbert, isn't it? Whimsy asked, taking the seat next to him. The young man started but nodded. I hear you delivered a mysterious letter to Colonel De Vries recently. A letter that caused some distress? Yes, sir. It was odd. No return address. Just the word private. Colonel looked angry, then scared, but he didn't say much. Did he open it here? In his study. I was outside when I saw him hurry in. The letter looked thick. Did he mention who it might be from? No, sir. He was very quiet after that. Whimsy smiled thinly. Did you notice anything else unusual that day? Visitors? Unfamiliar sounds? Gilbert hesitated. There was a woman in black, I think. Came in and left quickly before 11. I didn't see her face. Intriguing. Did she carry flowers? Gilbert nodded. Yes. A large bunch. Lilies, I think. Thank you, Gilbert. Your discretion is appreciated. Whimsy left the pub with a mind stirring like a disturbed beehive. A mysterious letter, a secret visitor, lilies arriving unexpectedly. These threads wove a tapestry far more tangled than a simple accident. Back at the De Vries estate, he found Lady De Vries awaiting him, her composure regained, but her eyes restless. I have spoken to your stepson, Whimsy said quietly. And others in the village? She sighed. And? The lilies were sent deliberately, not as a tribute, but as a provocation. She met his gaze squarely. Then someone wanted my husband to know he was despised, or that his death was no accident. Precisely. And that someone is likely far closer than the village gossip suspects. Outside, the last rays of sunlight faded, and the scent of lilies lingered like a question unanswered. Whimsy lit a cigar and took a slow draw, the smoke curling like the twisting path of the investigation. It seems, my lady, that the late colonel's final descent was not merely down the stairs, but into a labyrinth of secrets, resentments, and carefully placed lies. And you intend to find the thread that unravels it. Indeed. For in Fenchurch Little, even the quietest deaths echo loudest. Whimsy returned to the study as dusk thickened into evening, the windows now reflecting the gloom of a sky smudged with heavy clouds. The flicker of a single candle cast wavering shadows, making the familiar room seem suddenly alien, a stage set for secrets long suppressed. He moved with deliberate care, eyes noting every detail as if the air itself might whisper hidden truths. His glance fell upon the letters again, those folded papers lying scattered as if disturbed by some invisible hand. One envelope, slightly crumpled and bearing an unfamiliar seal, caught his attention. The wax bore a curious insignia, a lion passant, a symbol at odds with the colonel's usual correspondence. He broke the seal carefully, unfolding a single sheet of creamy stationery, the handwriting elegant yet precise, almost clinical in its formality. Dear Colonel, it began, I trust this letter finds you well. Our last conversation, though brief, has left certain matters unresolved. I urge you to reconsider your position regarding the estate and the pheasant preserves. it would be unfortunate if personal grievances were to spill into matters of property and legacy. For the sake of old friendships, I hope you will acquiesce. Yours sincerely, Reginald Hargrave. Whimsy murmured the name. Hargrave, a local landowner known for his relentless ambition and thinly veiled contempt for the Colonel's more traditional methods. The letter was dated just 3 days prior to the incident. With the letter folded back, Whimsy allowed his gaze to drift toward the staircase itself. The banister, worn smooth by years of use, held a faint smudge near the 3rd step, too low to be the Colonel's, given his height, but consistent with the reach of a smaller hand. Whimsy's thoughts flickered to the stepson, Philip. The lad's eagerness to appear indifferent seemed less convincing now. There was a hesitation in his answers, a subtle evasion. Was it arrogance or something more troubling? The possibility that Philip's business alibi might not be airtight lingered like a shadow. He rose abruptly and moved towards the large oak sideboard where a collection of silverware and small ornaments stood in orderly array. There, beneath a folded napkin, lay a silver salver engraved with the family crest, missing from the scene of the Colonel's fall. Whimsy picked it up carefully, noting the faintest trace of dust on one edge, as if recently disturbed. The salver's absence from the scene suggested it had been removed deliberately, or perhaps inadvertently dropped during a struggle. His mind ticked over the puzzle's fragments. A threatening letter, a secret visitor delivering lilies, an absent salver, and a stepson whose alibi was more fragile than it seemed. But one element gnawed most insistently: the mysterious woman Gilbert had glimpsed. Who was she, and what message did the lilies convey? In Victorian floral language, lilies could signify purity and majesty, but also death and mourning. Was this a genuine tribute, or a cruel mockery? Whimsy decided that a return to Lady de Vries was imperative. She had guarded her emotions carefully thus far, but subtle. Signs of strain betrayed a deeper turmoil. In the drawing room, Lady de Vries sat by the fire, her hands clasped tightly over a delicate handkerchief. Her usual composure wavered when Whimsy entered. "I found this letter among your late husband's papers," Whimsy said, placing the envelope on the small table before her. "From Reginald Hargrave. Do you know of any discord between them?" She glanced down, eyes flickering with a sadness that sharpened to something colder. Hargrave was an old acquaintance turned adversary. The pheasant preserves have been a long-standing point of contention, but Ambrose was a man who preferred to settle disputes quietly. He would not have tolerated open threats. And yet, here we have one, Whimsy remarked dryly. "Have you seen or heard anything of this Reginald recently?" "No, though I fear he may have had more influence than I realized." Whimsy inclined his head. "There is also the matter of your stepson, Philip. I have yet to meet this Mr. Hudson, his business contact." A shadow crossed Lady de Vries's face. "Philip has been distant, but I cannot believe he wished harm upon his father." "Belief is a poor substitute for evidence," Whimsy said lightly. "Still, I find it curious that the silver salver was missing from the study. A small detail, but one that often reveals more than a confession." "Perhaps Philip moved it," she suggested uncertainly. "Perhaps," Whimsy agreed. "Or perhaps someone sought to conceal a sign of disturbance." Lady de Vries's gaze dropped, and for a moment the walls seemed to close in around her. "It feels as if the house itself is conspiring to hide truths," she murmured, "and yet I am powerless to uncover them." "Fear not, my lady," Whimsy reassured. "Every secret, no matter how deeply buried, eventually finds its way to light." The evening wore on, and Whimsy excused himself, his mind alight with new angles to pursue. He would need to speak with Mr. Hudson and delve deeper into Philip's affairs. The young man's business dealings might yet reveal a motive or at least a crack in his carefully constructed facade. Later, in the quiet of his lodgings, Whimsy laid out his notes, letters, timelines, and whispered testimonies. The interplay between the Colonel's rigid world and the encroaching chaos surrounding his death seemed to hinge on something subtle, perhaps overlooked in haste. He recalled the clocks in the De Vries household, several, all slightly misaligned. A trivial observation, but one he intended to probe further. The time of death and the various alibis rested precariously on the precision of those instruments. Furthermore, the soundproofing of the study door, mentioned earlier by the butler, hinted at a need for privacy or concealment. What secrets could be spoken within those walls without fear of interruption? Whimsy sipped his tea, the dry tang mingling with his thoughts. Pattern was beginning to emerge, not from the obvious clues, but the faint discrepancies, the unsaid words, the gestures masked by politeness. The notion of a double life, or at least a hidden aspect of the Colonel's existence, began to crystallize. A man of discipline and order could conceal bitterness or desperation beneath a veneer of control. He resolved to return at first light to the village and make inquiries about Reginald Hargrave. The landowner's reputation for ruthless pragmatism might mask deeper ambitions. And perhaps the key lay in that letter, the ultimatum thinly veiled as a plea. As he prepared for bed, Whimsy's thoughts drifted to the woman in black who had delivered the lilies. Was she an agent of vengeance or a messenger of reconciliation? The ambiguity gnawed at him. He glanced once more at the scattered letters on the table and allowed a faint smile. The game was afoot, and the players were more numerous and complex than they first appeared. The night promised revelations, if one only had the patience to wait. Outside, the village slumbered beneath a blanket of mist, the gentle rustling of leaves whispering secrets to the dark. Whimsy closed his eyes, the faintest scent of lilies lingering like a prelude to the unfolding mystery. The dawn broke over Fenchurch Little with a muted glow, the low sun casting long fingers of light across the dew-speckled fields. Lord Peter Whimsy stepped from his lodgings, the brisk morning air sharpening his senses as he made his way toward the village solicitor's office. The street, narrow and lined with ancient stone cottages, was waking slowly, the faint clatter of shutters and the soft murmur of early risers punctuating the quiet. The solicitor's office was a modest building set between a bakery and a hardware store. A brass plaque beside the door read "Hudson and Partners," and the faint scent of polished wood drifted out whenever the door swung open. Whimsy entered to find a middle-aged man behind the counter, his spectacles perched low on his nose, sorting through a neat pile of papers. "Mr. Hudson?" Whimsy inquired politely. The solicitor looked up, his eyes keen but guarded. "Yes, that would be me. And you must be Lord Peter Whimsy. I have heard of you through the vicar." "Indeed. I'm investigating the circumstances surrounding Colonel de Vries's death. I understand you had a meeting with Mr. Philip de Vries on the morning of the incident." Hudson nodded, folding his hands on the desk. "Correct. We discussed some business matters concerning the estate and certain legal documents. The meeting lasted from roughly 10 until just past 11. "A reliable alibi, then," Whimsy remarked. "Did Mr. de Vries seem agitated or distracted in any way?" The solicitor paused thoughtfully. "Not particularly. He was professional, though somewhat preoccupied. I believe the family tensions weigh heavily upon him." Whimsy's eyes narrowed, slightly. "Did he mention any disputes with his stepfather or others?" "Only in passing. He was aware of disagreements concerning the estate and the pheasant preserves, but he showed little willingness to discuss details." "Did he say where he went after our meeting?" "He mentioned he intended to call on a client in the village center, but did not specify whom." "Thank you, Mr. Hudson. Your cooperation is most appreciated." As Whimsy left the office, he pondered the solicitor's words. Philip's alibi remained unshaken, yet the vagueness about his movements after the meeting raised questions. Had he been truthful, or had he sought to conceal something? He decided to continue his inquiries at the village center, where the cluster of shops, post office, and the Red Lion pub intersected. The village seemed to hold its breath, the morning bustle subdued, as if wary of the shadow cast by the colonel's death. At the post office, Mrs. Toller greeted Whimsy with a nod and a hint of a smile, despite the circumstances. "Back again, my lord," she said briskly. "Have you uncovered any new secrets?" "Only fragments," Whimsy replied. "I wonder if you might help me with another matter. Mr. Gilbert mentioned seeing a woman in black delivering lilies. Have you heard anything more about her?" Mrs. Toller's eyes flickered with interest. "She's been the talk of the village, though no one knows much. Came in twice last week, always just long enough to drop off flowers. The first time, she asked for the colonel personally. The second, no one saw her face. Did she leave any messages or notes?" "Nothing that was made public. But the postman mentioned she seemed in a hurry, nervous even." Whimsy's gaze sharpened. "Thank you. And what of Mr. Gilbert himself? Has he noticed anything unusual besides the lady in black?" Mrs. Toller hesitated, glancing around before leaning closer. "There's been talk of strange noises near the De Vries estate late at night. Footsteps on the gravel, shadows where none should be. The household staff are uneasy." "Any suspects?" "Only speculation. Some whisper the Major Brent, others speak of local poachers. But nothing concrete." Whimsy nodded thoughtfully and departed, his mind ticking over the possibilities. The nocturnal disturbances suggested someone was monitoring the estate or involved in clandestine activities, which might relate to the escalating tensions. His next stop was the village inn, where the early patrons nursed steaming cups and half-empty glasses. At the bar, he found Gilbert polishing a glass, his hands trembling slightly despite his efforts to appear composed. "Gilbert," Whimsy greeted quietly, "I wonder if you could answer a few more questions." The young postman swallowed nervously but nodded. "Do you recall exactly when the woman in black arrived on the day of the colonel's death?" "Just before 10, I think. She looked around carefully before coming in. Something about her made me uneasy." "Did she say anything?" "Only that the colonel was expecting her, though I don't know why." "And after she left, did you notice anyone else near the estate?" Gilbert bit his lip. "There was a figure by the back gate. A man, tall, wearing a hat. I couldn't see his face, but he stayed until the woman left." "Did the figure follow her or disappear in another direction?" "Disappeared toward the woods. But I heard voices shortly after." "Voices? Did you recognize them?" "No, sir. They were low, urgent." Whimsy made a mental note of the timing. Just before 10, the woman in black arrives, followed by a mysterious figure near the gate. Voices exchanged, then the fatal incident shortly thereafter. "Thank you, Gilbert. You've been most helpful." Exiting the inn, Whimsy's thoughts focused sharply on the timeline. The pieces were beginning to fall into place. The secretive visitor, the unseen man near the gate, the threatening letter from Hargrave, and the vague business dealings of Philip. Returning to the De Vries estate, Whimsy requested to see the household staff. The butler and housekeeper were dutiful, but visibly shaken, their loyalty to the family evident despite the recent turmoil. "Has anything unusual occurred recently?" Whimsy asked the butler. The man cleared his throat. "Sir, there have been some disturbances at night. Footsteps, whispers, the scent of tobacco not belonging to any of the household." "Anything else?" "Missed objects, sir. Small things like the silver salver and some letters. Lady De Vries mentioned missing jewelry as well, but I cannot confirm." Whimsy's eyes glinted. "A theft, perhaps linked to the tension within the household?" "Possibly, my lord, but no one has dared accuse anyone openly." The housekeeper added, "Miss Lucille, the maid, saw a shadow near the garden shed the evening before the colonel's death. She thought it a stray cat, but now she fears it was something else." "Thank you. These are valuable insights." As the day waned, Whimsy gathered these new clues. The secret meetings, the presence of shadowy figures, the thefts, and the fragile relationships. Each element added complexity rather than clarity, yet beneath the surface a pattern was forming. Later, in quiet reflection, Wimsey reviewed his notes once more. The fragmented timeline, visitors arriving and departing, whispered conversations in the night, missing items, suggested a conspiracy not merely of murder, but of deliberate deception. Who had the most to gain? Lady de Vries with a delicate position in the estate, Philip desperate to assert himself, Hargrave maneuvering to seize control, or perhaps the enigmatic woman in black, whose allegiance remained a mystery. The key, Wimsey decided, lay in uncovering the motives concealed beneath the polished facades and the silences that spoke louder than words. As twilight deepened, the air heavy with lilac and lingering uncertainty, Wimsey prepared for the next stage of his inquiry, one that would lead him deeper into the heart of the estate's secrets and into the shadows cast by those who walked its halls. Wimsey returned to the de Vries estate the following morning, the chill of early spring still clinging to the air. The household moved about with an air of quiet tension, as if each person feared that the walls themselves might betray them. He requested to see Lady de Vries once more, sensing that the strain upon her composure was growing more pronounced with every passing hour. She received him in the drawing-room, seated by the window where the light fell softly upon her pale face. Her hands trembled slightly as she rose to greet him, but there was a determined steadiness in her gaze. "My lord," she said quietly, "I fear the shadows deepen, and with them the dangers. I wish to speak frankly with you." Wimsey inclined his head, inviting her confidence. "Since the night of my husband's death, I have discovered something troubling," she began. "Among his papers, I found a ledger, hidden beneath others, detailing sums paid to a mysterious individual, entries marked only as R.H. The dates coincide suspiciously with recent tensions in the village." Wimsey's mind raced. R.H. The initials matched Reginald Hargrave, the landowner whose letter had already raised questions. The financial transactions suggested a relationship more complex, possibly corrupt or coercive. "May I see this ledger?" Wimsey asked. Lady de Vries nodded, retrieving a small leather-bound book from a drawer. Its pages were filled with neat columns of numbers and brief annotations. Wimsey scanned the entries, noting payments that were substantial, yet vaguely justified as consulting fees or land management. "These payments were made monthly, it seems," Wimsey observed. "Do you know the nature of the relationship between your husband and Mr. Hargrave?" "I do not," she admitted. "Ambrose was a private man, but I suspect he was being pressured, perhaps to sell portions of the estate or at least to yield control over certain rights." The puzzle sharpened further. A man known for his pride and rigidity, yet quietly making payments to a rival who threatened his holdings. What leverage did Hargrave possess? Wimsey set the ledger aside, his eyes meeting Lady de Vries's. "It appears there are matters beneath the surface far more tangled than mere family disputes." She sighed deeply. "There is more. Since my husband's death, I have received anonymous letters warning me to stay silent. Threats cloaked in civility, but unmistakable all the same. Have you preserved any of these letters?" "Yes." She handed him a folded note, the handwriting deliberate and elegant, but cold. It read, "For your own good, do not pry into matters best left buried. The estate will suffer if the past is unearthed." Wimsey folded the letter carefully. The tone suggested someone skilled in subtle menace, someone who understood the stakes and was willing to act decisively. His thoughts returned to Philip, who had been evasive in his explanations. Could the young man be caught between loyalty and self-interest? The ledger did not implicate him directly, but his recent behavior hinted at deeper involvement. He resolved to speak with Philip privately, hoping that the youth's conscience might yield some truths when freed from the pressures of family and expectation. Later that afternoon, Wimsey found Philip in the garden, pacing restlessly among the budding rose bushes. The young man's posture was rigid, his jaw clenched as if holding back words that threatened to escape. "Mr. de Vries," Whimsy began gently, "there is no shame in truth, especially when it can ease the burdens you carry." Philip's eyes flickered with conflicted emotion. "I did not harm my stepfather," he said quickly. "But there are things you should know, things I was afraid to speak aloud." Whimsy encouraged him to continue, sensing the weight of withheld confession. "Father was trapped," Philip said at last. "Hargrave had him under some sort of control. Those payments, he was buying silence or favors. I don't know exactly. But it was more than money. There were threats, subtle but unrelenting." "And what of the woman in black?" Whimsy asked. "The visitor who delivered lilies just before the tragedy." Philip's face paled. "That was my mother's old friend, Eliza Trent. She came to warn him, I think, to make him see reason. But whatever she hoped to achieve, it failed." Eliza Trent. The name rang a bell. Whimsy recalled a brief mention in Lady de Vries's correspondence of a former confidant estranged after a bitter quarrel years ago. "Why did she come so secretly?" Whimsy pressed. "Because the family was fractured," Philip said bitterly. "She did not trust Hargrave or anyone else. She feared what might happen if her warnings were ignored." Whimsy's mind pieced the threads together. A fractured family, hidden financial pressures, secret warnings, and escalating threats. The delicate balance of power had tipped, resulting in tragedy. "Was there anyone else who might have wished your stepfather ill?" Whimsy inquired, eyes searching. Philip hesitated, then nodded. "Major Brent. He was often at odds with father over the management of the lands. They argued bitterly in the weeks before." "Do you think he could be involved?" "I do not know, but the Major was reckless and had enemies." Whimsy resolved to confront Major Brent next, to weigh his temper and alibis against the emerging narrative. As evening fell, Whimsy's path led him to the modest but well-kept house of Major Brent. The retired officer greeted him with a wary but respectful demeanor. "Lord Peter, to what do I owe this visit?" "Major, I come seeking clarity about recent events and your relationship with Colonel de Vries." The Major's jaw tightened. "We disagreed, yes, loudly at times, but I am no murderer." "Where were you on the night of the Colonel's death?" The Major's eyes hardened. "At the village tavern until late. Several men can attest." Whimsy nodded. "And the argument you had?" "About the estate's future. I believe the Colonel was too stubborn, too afraid of change. But quarrels do not kill men." "Indeed. Yet quarrels can breed grudges. Have you noticed anything unusual since that night?" The Major sighed. "There have been strange noises on my property, shadows that move in the dark. I fear some of my old enemies have not forgotten." Whimsy's suspicions deepened. The web of conflicts extended beyond the family and into the village itself. Before leaving, Whimsy asked if the Major knew anything of the woman in black. "Only that she's a ghost from the past. Eliza Trent, I think. She was once involved with the family, but left under a cloud. No one knows what she truly wants." Whimsy thanked him and stepped back into the cooling air, the weight of unanswered questions pressing harder, the intricate dance of alliances and betrayals threaded through every corner of the estate and village. Returning to the de Vries house, Whimsy found the household gathered for dinner, faces drawn and eyes wary. Lady de Vries caught his glance and gave a faint, hopeful nod. As the meal proceeded under the watchful eyes of servants and silent walls, Whimsy considered the strands he had gathered, the secret payments, the threatening letters, the hidden visitors, the fractured loyalties. Each piece fit uneasily into the puzzle, but promised a revelation for yet to come. The night was still young, and the game far from over. The morning air was crisp as Lord Peter Whimsy stepped quietly into the de Vries estate gardens, the faint rustle of early spring leaves stirring softly around him. The events of the past days had weighed heavily on his mind, the tangled web of threats, hidden payments, fractured loyalties, and secret visitors seemed to thicken with every new revelation. Yet beneath the surface of the estate's elegant facades, something more subtle was at play, the restless undercurrent of fear and suspicion that pulsed through every whispered conversation and sidelong glance. Whimsy's first task was to revisit the scene of the crime, the very spot where Colonel Ambrose de Vries had met his untimely death. The gravel path near the back gate, where the mysterious figure had been seen lurking, was still disturbed, small impressions marking the damp earth. He crouched, running his gloved fingers lightly over the footprints, noting their depth and direction. The prints were irregular, someone pacing nervously, then abruptly turning and disappearing toward the wooded boundary. Nearby, the faint scent of tobacco lingered, a smoky, sweet aroma that did not belong to the colonel or any of the household. Whimsy rose thoughtfully. The butler's mention of unknown tobacco, the mysterious nighttime disturbances, and the unidentified visitor converged in his mind. He moved on to inspect the garden shed, where the maid had glimpsed a shadow the evening before the murder. The wooden door was slightly ajar, its hinges creaking softly as the wind stirred. Inside, the shed was cluttered with tools and flower pots, but something caught Whimsy's eye, a scrap of paper, torn and crumpled beneath a stack of empty seed packets. Carefully, he retrieved it and smoothed it out. The paper bore a hastily scrawled note. "Meet at midnight. Secrets cannot remain buried." The handwriting was hurried but familiar. He recognized it as the same style as the threatening letter Lady de Vries had shown him. The implication was chilling. Someone close was orchestrating these menacing messages, and their plan involved meetings under the cloak of darkness. Whimsy's thoughts turned to Eliza Trent, the woman in black, and the whispers about her strained past with the family. If she truly sought to warn or protect, why the secrecy? And who else might be involved? He decided to visit the village once more, seeking information from those who might have noticed late-night movements or overheard furtive conversations. At the village tavern, the air thick with smoke and muted chatter, Whimsy found a group of locals gathered near the hearth. Their faces bore the roughness of rural life, and their eyes flicked toward him with a mixture of curiosity and caution. One man, a wiry fellow named Tom Fletcher, claimed to have seen strange activity near the de Vries estate on the night of the murder. "Aye," Tom said, voice low. There was a black-clad figure skulking near the back gate. Looked to be arguing with someone, couldn't see who. Then the figure slipped off toward the woods. Whimsy's interest piqued. "Did you notice anything else? Perhaps anyone else moving about?" Tom nodded slowly. Saw a second man, younger, carrying a lantern. They spoke in hushed tones, tense as a pair of cornered foxes. "Did you recognize either man?" "No, but the younger one had a limp, and he smelled of tobacco, sweet like those fancy cigars." That detail struck Whimsy sharply. The unknown tobacco scent near the scene, and now the mention of a limp suggested a connection. Someone in the village, familiar with the estate but concealing his identity. Thanking Tom, Whimsy left the tavern with a renewed sense of urgency. He considered the household members once more, recalling the butler's mention of missing silver and letters. If someone was stealing correspondence, they might be trying to hide evidence, letters that could reveal motives or secrets. Back at the estate, Whimsy requested the household ledger to verify recent visitors and deliveries. Cross-referencing the dates, he noted several unexplained entries on the evening before the murder. One for a late delivery of flowers, possibly from the woman in black, and another for an unidentified visitor whose name was redacted. The missing letters, the secretive visitor, and the veiled threats coalesced into a shadowy conspiracy. Who was this visitor, and what were they hiding? Later that afternoon, Whimsy sought out Miss Lucille, the maid who had seen the shadow near the garden shed. Her eyes were wide with lingering fright as she recounted the night's events. I heard voices, she whispered, low and angry. I thought it was the wind at first, but then I saw them. 2 men arguing by the back gate. One had a limp, like you said. Did you recognize them? No, but one wore a ring, a signet with a crest I've seen on a few documents. A family crest? Whimsy asked. Yes. I believe it was the De Vries crest, but tarnished. It looked old. This new clue opened another thread. Could the second man, the younger visitor with the limp and the tobacco scent, be a relative, perhaps a disgraced family member or an illegitimate son? Whimsy's thoughts returned to Philip. Though he had seemed evasive, the young man's position within the family was precarious. Might there be others with claims or grudges? That evening, Whimsy sat in his room, reviewing every detail. The ledger entries, the threatening notes, the shadowy meetings, all pointed toward a carefully orchestrated plan to unsettle the estate and gain control. He resolved to confront Lady De Vries again, hoping her candor would reveal the deeper history behind the family's fractured ties. The past, he suspected, held the key to understanding the present chaos. The following day, Lady De Vries welcomed him into the library, the room heavy with the scent of old leather and dust. Her composure was steadier now, though a flicker of sadness remained. "There is more you should know, Lord Peter," she said quietly. "Years ago, my late husband had a brother, Henrik De Vries, who disappeared under mysterious circumstances. His name was erased from many family records, and his existence denied." Whimsy leaned forward, intrigued. "Henrik was known to have a limp," she continued. "He was a difficult man, prone to anger and reckless decisions. After a scandal involving debts and a broken engagement, he vanished from England. The pieces fell into place. The man with the limp seen near the estate could very well be Henrik, returning under the cover of night to reclaim what he believed was his rightful inheritance." "Do you think he might be involved in these recent events?" Whimsy asked. Lady De Vries nodded gravely. "If he has returned, he is determined and dangerous. He would stop at nothing to reclaim his place." Whimsy's mind raced. The threads of past grievances, present threats, and hidden identities wove a dark tapestry of ambition and betrayal. The question remained, was Henrik acting alone or was he in league with others? Perhaps Hargrave, the landowner with a vested interest in the estate's control. Determined to learn more, Whimsy planned a visit to the Boundary Woods where the shadowy figures had been seen disappearing. If Henrik was hiding there, the evidence might yet be found. As twilight deepened, Whimsy set out with a lantern in hand, his footsteps quiet upon the soft earth. The woods loomed, ancient trees casting long, sinister shapes. Somewhere within their depths lay the secrets waiting to be uncovered. He moved carefully, senses alert to every sound, the snap of a twig, the rustle of leaves. Suddenly, a voice whispered from the darkness, low and wary. "Who goes there?" Whimsy stepped forward into a small clearing, the lantern's glow revealing a gaunt man with a limp, his eyes sharp and calculating. "Henrik De Vries," Whimsy said softly. "I presume?" The man nodded slowly. "You are clever, Lord Peter, but not clever enough to unravel all the threads before I'm ready." A tense silence settled. Whimsy's pursuit of truth had led him here, to the heart of the family's shadows. What he uncovered next would determine the fate of the estate, and of those bound within its tangled history. Henrik De Vries's eyes glinted in the flickering lantern light, calculating and cold. But there was something else there. An unmistakable weariness, the weight of years spent in exile and bitterness. Lord Peter Whimsy stood steady, aware that this encounter was a delicate balance between confrontation and diplomacy. "You have returned to claim what was taken," Whimsy said quietly. "But vengeance cannot be built on shadows and threats alone. What is it you truly seek?" Henrik's gaze wavered briefly before settling again. "Justice," he said, voice rough. My father's estate was stolen from me through lies and deceit. Ambrose played his part in that betrayal. Now I'm here to set things right." Wimsey noted the old wounds running deep beneath the surface. "And the payments to Hargrave, the threats and intimidation." Henrik's jaw clenched. "Hargrave is a means to an end. He desires the lands for his own greed, but I have no allegiance to him. I used his resources to weaken my brother's grip. The threats were necessary. Fear is a tool for those who wield no power openly. But the death of Ambrose, did you intend that?" Henrik's eyes darkened. "No. I sought only to frighten, to force a reckoning. I did not kill him. That was neither my wish nor my design." Wimsey considered the words carefully. Henrik's confession was partial, yet his denial of murder carried the ring of truth. Someone else, perhaps driven by different motives, had delivered the fatal blow. "Then who?" Wimsey pressed. "Who profits from this tragedy beyond you?" Henrik hesitated, a flicker of doubt crossing his features. "There is another, one closer to the estate, who moves unseen among those who grieve. A shadow who envies and covets, whose patience has worn thin." Wimsey's mind raced. There were too many suspects, each with a claim and a grudge. The late-night meetings, the stolen letters, the anonymous threats, they all suggested a conspiracy, or at least multiple players entwined in a dangerous game. "I will find this shadow," Wimsey said steadily. "But you must understand, justice cannot be partial. It demands truth, no matter how uncomfortable." Henrik nodded slowly, the fire of his anger dimming to a smolder. "I understand, and I will cooperate, for the sake of the family I have lost." Leaving the woods, Wimsey felt the weight of the case deepen. Henrik's return had opened new avenues, but also new dangers. The estate was a battleground, not only for land and wealth, but for old sins and hidden betrayals. The next morning, Wimsey sought Lady de Vries. Her face was drawn, but her eyes held a resolute glimmer. He shared Henrik's confession cautiously, gauging her reaction. She sighed. "Henrik was my husband's estranged brother, but also the key to a secret no one wanted unearthed. Their father's will was changed after Henrik's disgrace, shifting inheritance and leaving many resentful." Wimsey pressed for details. "There was a codicil, hidden in a safe deposit box at a nearby bank, that might reveal the true heir. Or heirs. If found, it could unravel the entire family's claims." A new urgency gripped the investigation. The safe deposit box, the codicil, the hidden will, these were the final pieces that could explain motives and mend fractured alliances. Wimsey arranged to visit the bank discreetly, accompanied only by a trusted local clerk. The box was unassuming, tucked among rows of others, but inside lay a bundle of yellowed papers, folded with care. The codicil was written in a firm hand, bearing the late patriarch's signature and a new clause that amended the original will. It stated that in the event of disinheritance or disappearance, the estate should be divided equally among the brothers' descendants, including any unacknowledged children. Wimsey's thoughts immediately turned to Philip de Vries. Could he be the secret heir? The young man's evasiveness now seemed less suspicious and more protective. Returning to the estate, Wimsey confronted Philip gently with the codicil. "I've seen this document," Wimsey said. "It changes everything. Are you aware of any siblings, born out of wedlock or concealed?" Philip's face tightened with a mixture of shame and relief. "There is someone," he admitted. "A half-sister. I only recently learned of her. My father kept her existence hidden from us all." Wimsey leaned forward, attentive. "Where is she now?" "I do not know," Philip whispered. "She was raised far away by a family who took her in after my mother's death. Father wanted her kept secret, to protect her, or perhaps to hide the family's shame. The emergence of this unknown sister added a new dimension to the tangled family history. Could she be the shadow Henrik spoke of, the unseen player who might have acted out of jealousy or desperation? Wimsey's inquiries soon led him to a small village beyond the estate's borders, where a woman matching Philip's description resided. Her name was Clara, and though her bearing was modest, her eyes held the same steely determination Wimsey had seen in the De Vries bloodline. Meeting Clara was a turning point. She spoke cautiously but with conviction about her father's legacy and the fractures that had shaped her life. "I was kept away for my safety," she said, "but I have always watched, waiting for a chance to claim what is mine." When Wimsey asked about the recent murder, Clara's expression darkened. "I did not kill Ambrose, though I wished to confront him. He denied me my birthright, and that denial bred hatred." The web of motivations tightened. Clara's presence could explain the anonymous letters and stolen correspondence, attempts to unsettle the estate and force a reckoning. Wimsey arranged a meeting with Lady De Vries, Philip, Henrik, and Clara, hoping to bring all truths into the open. The gathering was tense, emotions running high as accusations and defenses mingled. Henrik accused Hargrave of manipulating the family for his own gain. Clara challenged Lady De Vries's authority and questioned the legitimacy of her position. Philip sought to mediate, torn between loyalty and justice. In the midst of the storm, Wimsey observed carefully. The truth was more complex than simple villainy or victimhood. It was a story of pride, betrayal, and the corrosive power of secrets. Finally, Wimsey revealed a crucial discovery: the missing silver, found hidden in Hargrave's warehouse, along with letters proving his attempts to buy influence and control. Hargrave's scheme unraveled, exposing him as the mastermind behind many of the threats and manipulations. His alliance with unknown accomplices had destabilized the estate, culminating in the tragic death of Ambrose. With evidence mounting, the family grudges, though bitter, began to shift toward resolution. Henrik agreed to cease his vendetta. Clara accepted her place as rightful heir alongside Philip, and Lady De Vries vowed to rebuild trust. The shadows that had cloaked the estate began to lift, though the scars of betrayal would remain. Wimsey, satisfied that justice had been served in full measure, prepared to take his leave. The case had revealed the fragile threads that bind families and the dangers of secrets left to fester. As he stepped away from the De Vries estate, the spring sun broke through the clouds, casting light upon a land ready, at last, for renewal. The De Vries estate settled into an uneasy calm after the confrontation in the library, but for Lord Peter Wimsey, the investigation was far from over. The revelations about Henrik's return, Clara's existence, and Hargrave's underhanded manipulations had peeled back many layers, yet beneath the surface, threads still pulsed with unanswered questions. The estate, with all its grandeur, still held secrets. Quiet ones, like whispered conversations behind closed doors and shadows that seemed to stretch longer as the days passed. That afternoon, Wimsey found himself wandering the upper corridors of the manor where portraits of stern ancestors gazed down from gilded frames. Among them, a faded miniature caught his eye, depicting a young woman whose resemblance to Clara was unmistakable. Intrigued, he sought out Lady De Vries once again. "The woman in this portrait," Wimsey began. "She must be connected to Clara." Lady De Vries nodded slowly. Her mother, Evelina De Vries, Henrik's secret wife, a scandal that tore the family apart years ago. Their union was never publicly acknowledged. Wimsey felt the weight of history settling around them. "The secrets of the past have poisoned the present," he said softly. "Yes," Lady De Vries agreed, "and now they threaten the future." Later, as twilight draped the estate in its dusky hues, Wimsey met privately with Philip. The young man's face was taut with unresolved tension. "This family legacy is more complicated than I imagined," Philip admitted. "Clara's arrival unsettles everything." She is a rightful heir, Whimsy assured him, but her motivations remain unclear. We must understand her fully. Philip hesitated. There's something else. Letters I found among my father's belongings, addressed to Clara. They hint at a hidden will in a place called the Hollow. I don't know what it means. Whimsy's curiosity sharpened. The Hollow? A place on the estate near the old woods, a family retreat long abandoned. The next morning, Whimsy and Philip made their way to the Hollow. The path was overgrown, tangled with briars and creeping ivy, but signs of recent disturbance caught Whimsy's eye, a faint imprint of footprints and a discarded glove. The place felt charged, as if it held its own breath, waiting. Exploring the dilapidated pavilion at the heart of the retreat, Whimsy discovered a weathered metal box hidden beneath floorboards. Inside were documents wrapped carefully in oilcloth. A will, older and more detailed than any previously seen, signed by the patriarch before his death. The will revealed a startling truth. The patriarch had intended the estate to be shared among all his descendants, but with a final stipulation that they prove their loyalty and unity by uncovering a long-buried family secret concealed at the Hollow. Whimsy's mind raced. This test of loyalty explained the cryptic letters and secret meetings, but what was the secret? That evening, he gathered the family together, Lady de Vries, Philip, Clara, and even Henrik. He laid out the discovery, emphasizing the need to act together to uncover the truth beneath the estate's grounds. Reluctantly, the group agreed to descend into the darkness of a forgotten cellar beneath the Hollow, following an old staircase revealed by the pavilion's decay. The air grew cold and damp as they descended, the flicker of their lantern casting eerie shadows on stone walls. At the bottom, they found a heavy iron door, locked but rusted with age. Using a key from the documents, Whimsy unlocked it, revealing a chamber lined with shelves holding leather-bound journals, old ledgers, and faded letters. As they examined the contents, the family's fractured history came into sharper focus. There were records of illicit dealings, promises broken, and a hidden alliance between the patriarch and an old rival, aimed at preserving the family name, but at a terrible cost. One journal entry spoke of a betrayal so deep it threatened to unravel everything. The patriarch's own hand in framing Henrik to protect the family's reputation, a sacrifice that shattered a brother's life and sowed decades of resentment. Clara read aloud a passage that chilled the room. To keep the family whole, one must bury the truth, even if it kills the heart. The weight of these words hung heavy as accusations and regrets surfaced, yet in the dim light, something shifted. A fragile understanding, a recognition that healing demanded truth no matter how painful. Suddenly, a noise from above startled them, a faint scuffling, hurried footsteps. Someone was approaching the Hollow. Whimsy motioned for silence. They listened as voices rose in whispered argument, Hargrave's unmistakable tone, laced with menace. Hargrave had returned, desperate to seize the documents and destroy the evidence that would ruin him. Whimsy's heart quickened. The moment had come to confront the man who had manipulated, threatened, and nearly destroyed the family. Emerging into the fading light, Whimsy and the family faced Hargrave at the pavilion. His eyes gleamed with fury and desperation. "You think these old papers mean anything? The estate will be mine, one way or another." "You're wrong," Whimsy said calmly. "The truth has a way of coming to light." Hargrave lunged for the documents, but Philip stepped forward, blocking him. In the ensuing struggle, Hargrave tripped, falling heavily. The fight ended as a constable, alerted earlier by Whimsy's discreet message, arrived to place Hargrave under arrest. With Hargrave removed, a tense quiet settled. The family stood together, surrounded by the tangible proof of their past. The journals, the ledgers, the will. The path forward was uncertain, but for the first time, there was hope. The family's fractures, though deep, could be mended through shared truth and acceptance. As the estate's ancient walls seemed to breathe a sigh of relief, Whimsy reflected on the case. It had been a journey through shadows, secrets, and sorrows, but also one of reconciliation and renewal. The sun rose the next morning over the De Vries estate, casting warm light on a family determined to face its past and forge a new future, together. The De Vries estate, having weathered the storm of revelations and confrontations, settled into an uneasy quiet, but Lord Peter Wimsey knew better than to trust appearances. The web of resentments, half-truths, and buried secrets that had entangled the family had not simply unraveled, they had shifted, revealing subtler patterns and deeper wounds. The arrest of Hargrave, while a significant victory, felt more like a pause in a long, simmering drama than a final resolution. That morning, Whimsy stood by the great bay window of the manor's drawing room, the spring sunlight pouring in and illuminating the dust motes in the air. The scene was deceptively peaceful. Lady De Vries sat quietly, reading letters that bore the unmistakable seal of a solicitor. Philip was pacing with restless energy. Clara remained distant, her gaze fixed out toward the gardens as though weighing some invisible burden. Henrik, the once hot-headed exile, had retreated to his chambers, his presence a muted but persistent tension. Whimsy's mind worked through the pieces once more. Hargrave had been the obvious villain, greedy, ruthless, and skilled in manipulation, but the patriarch's codicil and the secret journal entries had exposed a family legacy fraught with betrayals that went far beyond the reach of a single man's ambitions. There were questions still unanswered. The mysterious delays in correspondence, the discrepancies in the household's accounts, and most unsettlingly, the faint but persistent hints of a third party influencing events from the shadows. He turned as Lady De Vries approached, the letters in her hand trembling slightly. "Lord Peter," she began, voice low, "these missives have arrived from our London solicitors. They pertain to a legal challenge, an obscure claimant contesting the will. A claim made in the name of a woman you have yet to meet." Whimsy raised an eyebrow. "Another ghost from the past, perhaps?" "Indeed. The letter speaks of an Evangeline Martel, who asserts rights to a portion of the estate. Her claim is accompanied by documentation that suggests she was legally adopted by the patriarch under a different identity. It is complicated." The news cast a shadow over the tentative peace. Whimsy's thoughts turned immediately to the labyrinth of deceptions and family entanglements. If Evangeline Martel was genuine, then the estate's already fractured inheritance might fracture further, and the motives behind the murder might take on new dimensions. Whimsy requested a meeting with the household steward and the solicitor who had sent the letters. Together, they examined the papers in detail. The adoption records were authentic, yet curiously obscured, with gaps in dates and signatures that suggested deliberate obfuscation. The solicitor advised caution. This was no ordinary challenge, but a legal minefield that could take years to resolve. Later that day, Whimsy visited the local parish archives, sifting through dusty registers and faded documents for any mention of Evangeline Martel. His search led him to a baptismal record bearing her name and a curious note that she had once been known as Evelyn De Vries, baptized under a different parish decades earlier. A tangled identity hidden beneath layers of legal and social facades. Returning to the manor, Whimsy found Clara waiting in the library. "You've heard about Evangeline," she said quietly. "I have. She was my mother's childhood friend. I'd forgotten her name until recently." The revelation brought a new dimension to Clara's story. If Evangeline was connected to her mother's past, then the family's secrets might be more entangled than anyone realized. She could be a threat or an ally, Whimsy mused. Her motives will be key. In the days that followed, Whimsy orchestrated discreet inquiries into Evangeline's whereabouts. Reports placed her in a modest cottage several miles from the estate, living quietly but with no obvious ties to the family. When Whimsy and Clara traveled to meet her, they found a woman in her late 50s, sharp-eyed and reserved, yet bearing a faint resemblance to the de Vries lineage. Evangeline's story was one of displacement and survival. Adopted after the patriarch's estrangement from her birth family, she had grown up in foster homes, unaware of her heritage until recently. The sudden knowledge had prompted her legal claim, driven not by greed but by a yearning to reclaim lost identity and dignity. Yet as the conversation deepened, Whimsy detected an undercurrent of bitterness, an unresolved pain that threatened to cloud reason and fester into resentment. Back at the estate, tensions simmered as news of Evangeline's claim spread. Philip expressed skepticism, while Clara seemed torn between sympathy and wariness. Lady de Vries feared the fracturing of the family's fragile unity. Henrik remained silent, brooding in his room. The atmosphere grew charged, the estate once again a stage for old conflicts and new fears. Meanwhile, Whimsy continued to piece together overlooked details. Discrepancies in household inventories, unexplained absences, and the timing of visits from a mysterious visitor seen by servants but never identified. These clues hinted at ongoing scheming, perhaps an attempt to exploit the estate's instability further. One evening, as Whimsy reviewed his notes by the study's firelight, a sudden knock interrupted his concentration. It was Philip, pale and breathless. "Lord Peter," he whispered, "I overheard something disturbing. Henrik and Hargrave's solicitor meeting late at the stables." Whimsy's heart quickened. Hargrave's arrest was supposed to end his influence, yet this suggested otherwise. Together they slipped toward the stables, moving through shadows and the scent of hay. Voices murmured in low tones. "I told you, the estate's future isn't sealed by courts." Henrik's voice was urgent. "We need allies." Hargrave's solicitor's reply was cold and measured. "The legal claimants will buy us time. The debts grow. The family fractures. Our window is narrowing." Whimsy stepped forward, his presence causing the conspirators to freeze. "Gentlemen," he said crisply, "your intentions are quite transparent, but rest assured I have anticipated such moves." The confrontation was brief but decisive. With Philip's aid, Whimsy ensured the local constabulary was summoned to apprehend the conspirators before they could advance their scheme. The fallout was swift. Henrik's complicity shocked the family, deepening old wounds but clarifying loyalties. Hargrave's solicitor was revealed as a long-time associate intent on wresting control through legal manipulation. In the weeks that followed, the de Vries family began tentative steps toward reconciliation. Evangeline's claim was acknowledged, not as a threat, but as an opportunity to heal fractured bonds. Clara and Philip found common ground, while Lady de Vries pledged to rebuild trust and transparency. As spring melted into summer, Lord Peter Whimsy prepared to leave the estate. The case concluded, but the lessons etched indelibly in the hearts of those involved. At the final moment, as he adjusted his hat by the front door, Whimsy cast a glance back at the manor. "Justice," he murmured, "is a curious thing, never quite neat, often inconvenient, but always necessary. And families, well, they are the grandest puzzles of all." With a faint smile and a tilt of his head, he strode away, leaving the de Vries estate poised on the fragile cusp of renewal, the shadows at last retreating before the light of truth. The afternoon sun hung low over the de Vries estate, casting long shadows that seemed to echo the lingering secrets still clinging stubbornly to its ancient walls. Lord Peter Whimsy stood once more in the drawing-room, the assembled family before him, a portrait of fractured nobility, tentative alliances, and brittle hopes. Clara's steady gaze met his. Philip's restless fingers tapped nervously. Lady de Vries's composure wavered just a fraction, and Henrik's scowl was guarded but present. Even Evangeline, the newly acknowledged claimant, watched with wary anticipation. "Before we disperse," Whimsy began, his voice smooth yet imbued with unmistakable authority, "I believe it prudent to recount the full chain of events that has led us here, lest any lingering doubts or misunderstandings poison the fragile peace that now seems possible." He paused, adjusting his tie with a subtle flourish that belied the weight of his words. "Our inquiry revealed a family bound by more than blood, by secrets long buried beneath polished manners and gilded facades. The patriarch, in his wisdom and fear, concealed truths that fractured his heirs. The secret marriage to Evelina, the painful estrangement of Henrik, the hidden adoption of Evangeline. Each deception served to protect the family name, but at great cost." Whimsy's eyes flicked toward Henrik. It was no coincidence that Henrik found himself framed and cast out, a sacrificial pawn to safeguard appearances. Hargrave's malevolence, while opportunistic, exploited these vulnerabilities with cold calculation. Yet, Whimsy continued, the greatest deception was not merely the lies told to the world, but those told to each other. The hidden will, the forged letters, and the veiled threats were all instruments of control, designed to keep the family divided and weak. Clara's voice was soft but steady as she added, "We have each been prisoners of past grievances, unaware that the true prison was our own mistrust." Whimsy inclined his head approvingly. "Precisely. The family's test, encoded in the patriarch's last will, demanded unity, discovery of the truth, and acceptance of one another's faults. It was never a contest of inheritance alone, but of loyalty and courage." Turning to Evangeline, Whimsy said, "Your claim was more than a legal challenge. It was a reminder that identity and belonging transcend paper and property." At last, he fixed Philip with a look both stern and kind. "And you, Philip, have shown the maturity to rise above youthful indignation, embracing a future not dictated by rancor, but by reason." A heavy silence followed, broken only by the soft crackle of the dying fire. Then Lady de Vries spoke, her voice tempered with relief and resolve. "Lord Peter, you have brought clarity where there was only confusion. For that we are grateful." Whimsy allowed himself a rare, modest smile. "It has been my pleasure, madam. Justice, as I often say, is a delicate balance, one not served by haste or assumptions." He stepped toward the window, gazing out across the estate's manicured lawns, now softened by spring blooms. The shadows of the past will linger, no doubt, but with truth as their light, they need no longer be feared. With that, Lord Peter Whimsy tipped his hat to the family, turned on his heel, and strode away down the gravel drive, his silhouette framed by the fading light. As the manor's heavy doors closed behind him, a single word hung in the air: resilience. For in the end, it was not lilies ordered in mourning that defined this house, but the quiet, resolute determination to confront the past and walk bravely into the future. Tools,